What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. I know you missed me. Don't worry, I missed you too. This week we're checking out tattoos sent in by viewers, like you. We've got some sent in by tattooers, some from collectors, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So let's not waste any more time and get right into it. Alright, the first tattoo sent in is from AZ out of Toronto, Canada, and they are still within their first year of their apprenticeship. And AZ sent in this black and white micro-portrait of Michael Jordan that really does have an initial wow factor. You can clearly tell this is Michael Jordan from across the street. Not just because of those wild fingers and his Bulls jersey, but I really do think you nailed it when it came to his face. You do have a couple white highlights where I myself probably wouldn't have put them. In the knuckles and in the nostril are probably two places I would have left it without. They're really just not doing him any benefit. One of my favorite parts about this tattoo are these shades in the face, because those are very smooth and consistent. I wish those shades carried down to the bottom part of this tattoo as well, because in the areas of the arm, the jersey, and the basketball, I can see a lot of rake marks or needle marks happening in those areas where it just doesn't look as smooth as the face. I do like that you're able to read the letters in the hat. A lot of times when it comes to that small script, it just ends up being very unlegible and not very clear. I don't exactly know how long that'll stick around, but for the time being, it does look great. I do think you nailed the shadow in the background behind his head. It's pretty solid and dark and has all the right soft edges. When it comes to the shadow behind his hand on his face, I wish that shadow was a lot more like the one behind his head. I can see a few outline marks toward the edge of that shadow, and those are typically things that we want to try and get rid of or hide. If I were doing this tattoo, I would have started out by shading those darker areas under his chin and to the right of his hand and faded off into the softest areas of that shadow. Another thing about those shades in the basketball itself, you have some patchy areas that aren't really helping it seem like a smooth, round basketball. When it comes to that area in specific, you really have to take your time and layer it in. And right now, those blockier shades are just causing this to look a bit flat. And one last and final thing, it looks like you started to do the jersey dots at the bottom, but maybe realized immediately that was probably a bad idea. Whether that be because it was going to be a whole lot of dots or it probably wasn't going to look super realistic, it was a nice choice that you didn't decide to do that, but I would have tried to cover up those dots somehow because right now they just look out of place. And as I said before, this is a very solid tattoo, and I honestly think there's only a couple things that you need to work on. Layering up those shades and spending more time in those dark areas is really going to take your work to the next level. But thank you once again, AZ, for sending that in and letting me talk about it. And the next tattoo sent in is from Jessie Peck. You mentioned you're on your 8th year of tattooing, and you said your stuff has a ton of issues and you're looking to rectify those. But when I look at the frog tattoo you sent in, I don't see a tattoo with a whole bunch of issues. Rather something that could just use a couple tips or tricks. It does look like you took your time and you have control of your shades, because these things are right where they need to be. And you do have nice contrast in your color choices. For example, the greens in the face and the oranges in the hands. It just seems like it's lacking some mild blacks, especially when it comes to under that hand that's sitting on top of the guitar. There's not enough contrast in between his fingers and the guitar to really make it look like the fingers sitting on top of that guitar. Wait a second. Is he sitting on a giraffe's neck? That's what it looks like. It doesn't really look like a branch, but it really looks like he's sitting on a really thin giraffe's neck. Or that's a really big frog. It just seems like you're missing those dark shades a little bit of everywhere. Under the guitar, on his legs would have really helped this tattoo. You just need those darker tones to help lift those lighter tones up and off of objects. And they just make those lighter tones feel that much brighter. I do think this tattoo needs more definitive edges. And that can be done with using a very small black outliner or a darker shade of those colors that you're using. It does look like you used a thin outline in several areas around this tattoo, but I do think that outline could be a little bolder or a little more thick just to give it some pop, and it will help stand the test of time. I do think this tattoo is missing some background color as well. Maybe some light lavender. It just seems like you're missing that third color to really round off this color palette. But overall, I can tell you've been tattooing for a long time, and the issues that you're looking to rectify aren't going to be hard ones to fix. And this just goes to show the newer tattooers that you should really never stop learning. Jessie is an 8-year tattooer, still hungry out here trying to get better. And that's something this channel is all about, and something we should all be striving for. So I appreciate you, Jessie, and I hope these tips help. Let's see, this next one looks like it was sent in from a couple. I really thought couples only did Facebook pages, but looks like a picture of me there. Yep, that's definitely me with Nina and Jeff. I actually got to meet Jeff and Nina in New York at the New York Tattoo Expo, and it looks like they each sent in a tattoo. And I didn't get to see these tattoos that were sent in there, so these tattoos are still new to me. This one here is on Nina. It does come off a bit dark, but I do love this tattoo a lot. I really like the fact that it's not just a portrait of Beetlejuice, but it's got a whole lot of other elements happening as well. The lettering that was chosen for this tattoo really fits the vibe. I do love the little gargoyle as well that's kind of peeking over the top. I do think that's the top of his headstone, if I'm not mistaken. And the little spider web is a nice touch as well, kind of coming around the entire thing. And you've got Barb and Adam on the side as well, kind of just hanging out. And I like how these faces aren't overly detailed, but you can tell just who they are. Composition-wise, this thing kills. There's a lot going on. For the amount of space used, this thing's got it all. And even his little beady eyes are just so well done. I think the one and only thing I would have done different is to try and get Beetlejuice to stand up off that background just a touch more. It's just a bit dark for my taste personally. I just think adding a little bit of skin tone in there to help break up all that black would have just helped give this tattoo a bit more dimension. But again, overall, I think this thing is killer. It's really got it all. Now, as far as Jeff's tattoo goes, he sent in this Fear and Loathing tattoo. And again, this is another great piece. You guys really do have some great tattoos. I love the composition on this thing. It's got this nice edge on one side, but the other side just kind of feels very organic and kind of disappears where it needs to. This lettering carries your eyes around the entire tattoo, from left to right, all the way back to the left again. And Johnny Depp's face is spot on. You could recognize him from across the courtroom.
Were you there?
I love the white outline around the frame of the glasses. That thing was done so well. And just the right amount of detail on Dr. Gonzo's face. It's not overdone. But man, you guys do have some great work. So thank you so much for sending that in. And again, it was great to meet you guys. It's always great to meet people who know about the channel and want to participate and send something in. So thank you. All right, the next tattoo sent in is from Yaz, who has been tattooing since around December. And Yaz sent in this very bold toucan tattoo. This one's got some heavy traditional influence with some pseudo neo-traditional aspects as well. So the first thing I can say about this tattoo is it's very easy to read. That being said, there are some things that I would have done a lot different. One of them being your color palette overall. For instance, the sun in the background doesn't really seem to pop on this person's skin tone. So I would have went with something more bold, something along the tangerine or reddish orange route, just to separate it from their skin tone. This color could look great on paper, but when you put it along their skin tone, it really just blends in and looks flat. Going with the orange was a good choice, especially with the blue bird. However, I do think it could have just been more bold. If we bring our eyes to the tail feather of the bird, those black shades that are there just seem inconsistent on the way down. The same could be said about the feathers and the wings. The shading in all three groups of these feathers just seems different. There's no consistency that carries over from one group to the next. And speaking of the black shade in the tail feather, it would have been nice to see that black butt up against that wing just a bit more. It seems like you left a lot of skin tone open in that area when it could have just been a bit tighter. The color choices overall just seem very drab. The blue in the wings, I probably would have went with more of a royal blue mixed with a light blue, and it would still, in theory, work well with those oranges in the background. The flower itself seems out of place, as it seems like it's attached to that branch. And if it is attached to that branch, then that looks like a gigantic flower. So I probably would have made that flower a bit bigger so it didn't seem like it's attached to that branch. Speaking of the branch, I probably would have ended that branch so it didn't look like it just disappeared into nothing. I think the best thing about this tattoo is its outlines. I just think you need to find colors that work for you, that you can carry over from tattoo to tattoo. Learning a color palette can be tricky, and it takes a lot of experimenting. But when you find those colors that work so well with each other, it's only going to make your process that much easier. You have a solid foundation and you know how to put in color. Now I think the next step is to figure out which colors to use and where. So yes, keep experimenting, and thank you so much for sending that in. The next tattoo is sent in from Dustin James out of Jacksonville, Florida. And Dustin, you sent in this black and white owl. And man, you guys are killing it today. This thing is bold. The eye looks great. It's almost piercing, and you've got good use of tonal value running throughout this entire tattoo, especially in those wings. The shades that are in those wings are pretty consistent. You can always tell by those needle marks. You've got some heavy blacks in contrast with those larger areas of skin tone, giving this thing some really good interest. And all those areas of skin tone are going to allow this thing to heal pretty breezy. I'm not a huge fan of the tufts in the chest and in the wing, as they kind of come off looking fake. You've got one or two little tufts that you can tell that you spent a little more time than the rest, but most of them kind of just fall flat. I just think you needed to add a little more time to those areas to really help take this thing to the next level. The crystals I think are unnecessary, and honestly I didn't even see them for some time. They don't really add any value to this tattoo. They just don't really belong. I do like the white highlights in the eye and the beak. It really helps these things stand out. I'm not such a huge fan of the white in the feathers. Again, my rule of thumb is just to put whites in areas that are shiny, wet, or reflective. In some cases, you can put white in objects to help them look like they're lifting off of other objects. For instance, the white in the beak is doing an excellent job in doing just that. Typically, I wouldn't add white to that piece, but since that tone is so similar to the tone below it, it does a great job of separating those two. You did send in another tattoo that I wanted to show off because this thing does have some great control. Normally, you'd see a lot of holiday haze or skin tone shining through when the tattoo settles down, but in this case, I don't see any of that happening. And the outline is super solid. Again, this is typically a very difficult task to do when it's not with solid black. Even the fine lines are done very well throughout the mane. The saturation in the leaves are black. And it's also nice to see contrast of shading. You've got the solid red in the horse and the stipple shading in the flower, just adding some cool variation. But yeah, Dustin, looking at these two tattoos in particular, it shows you know multiple techniques and you aren't just one trick pony. Thank you so much for sending that in and letting us talk about it. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for this week's critiques. But before we go, you know we gotta talk about my favorite tattoo of the day, which was sent in by Jeff. And I know this is probably gonna start a fight in the household, but Jeff, tell Nina I'm sorry, yours is my favorite. Both of your tattoos are amazing, to be quite honest, but the cleanliness and legibility of the Fear and Loathing tattoo just edges this one out over the other one. I love the way this thing sits on the arm. I love everything about this tattoo. I'm jealous it's not on me. So congratulations, Jeff, on being this week's winner. All right, guys, don't go anywhere just yet, because there's an artist I want to share with you who I think you should all be following. And that's Maraden Tattoo out of Moscow, Russia. What's cool about this artist is they implement a lot of the techniques that we discussed today. They have a very specific color palette that they like to use throughout their work, and their saturation is insane. If you look through these reds, you can't find a single holiday. These things are so incredibly solid. Their style is so unique that it's one of those, if you were to see it out in the wild, you'd know exactly whose it was. The way they roll off their lines and shades into lights and shadows is just flawless. To do a tattoo in this style, this well, takes extreme discipline. And although these designs look pretty simple, I'd venture to believe that these are probably one of the harder tattoos to pull off. So do yourself a favor, head on over to their page, give them a follow, get inspired, and let them know I sent you. Once again, thank you guys so much for sticking around to the end of the video. Don't forget, if you'd like to see your tattoos featured here on this channel, you can do so by sending them to ponycritiques@gmail.com. Hit that subscribe button while you're here, and until next week, see ya!